Hey everyone, so I'm going to do an astrology chart reading for Adam Driver. He plays Kylo Ren in the new Star Wars films, and so that's just come out, and I think he's quite an interesting person, quite a good character. I aim to do these sort of readings on sort of topical, relevant people, people that I find interesting. You can always comment and request if you want me to do a reading on anyone in particular as well. I won't always go through all of the houses as well, so just to keep it precise and time-wise, usually just the houses that have a lot of planets in them. Not to say that the houses that don't have planets in them aren't relevant, it just means there isn't that much attention going on in that area of your life, and it's going to be more active during a transit. So he's got sort of a lot of dominant energy in Sagittarius and Scorpio. He's got a Sagittarius stellium, and he's got a lot of Scorpio planets here, as well as quite a bit of Uranian energy. So I'll go straight onto his first house and his rising sign, which basically represents the horizon when you're born. So the ascendant is where the sun will rise, the MC being midday. The ascendant sign is sort of how you come across to people when you first meet them. It's usually when you sort of engage in superficial or impersonal sort of interactions. It's really not how you are sort of deep down. So I kind of think there's two sort of sides to Aquarius risings. They're either the shy, sort of more reserved, come across a bit austere type, which is the Saturn, or there's the Uranian energy, which is very odd, different, quirky, quite sociable, because Aquarius has two rulers, the traditional ruler being Saturn and then the modern ruler being Uranus. So I think those two energies definitely come into play with an Aquarius sort of archetype. So I tend to think that Adam's a bit more of the Saturnian sort of type of the Aquarius, because he usually likes to dress quite sort of black, non-shocking sort of clothing, which is the opposite of Uranus. I think one interview actually he did wear like a whole black suit, the black tie and everything. So he does, I think, represent a bit more of the Saturnian. He can also come across as reserved, kind of in the way that he's not, won't really expand that much on conversations that he doesn't really want to engage in, and come across a bit closed off and sort of hard to guess what he's thinking. He can kind of get into the conversation a bit more, especially with interviews and stuff. You can see this when he's feeling a bit more comfortable, and then the Sagittarius stellium comes out, because Sagittarius is very talkative and very friendly. So also with an Aquarius rising, they can come across as very intellectual, factual, sort of goofy, maybe unusual in some way, sometimes a dry sense of humour, friendly and sort of sociable, maybe even a little bit rebellious, the planet Uranus ruling that. So they kind of like to shock people and not sort of do or say what you kind of expect them to. What I was saying before about the way he sort of dresses and presents himself, it has a lot to do with his Scorpio sun influence as well there. So it's very black and very sort of almost secretive in a way, and then again that sort of reserved manner and those sort of piercing eyes that he has as well. I find that sort of Aquarius risings and also Sagittarius risings are probably the most tall of the zodiac, so he is quite tall, he's got quite a build on him as well. So with the Scorpio and the Saturn, they love black, they love sort of inconspicuous sort of clothing. They're not really there to sort of show off. Any planets that's in the first house or on the ascendant, you identify quite a lot with those planets. They're usually the most sort of conscious planets that you're aware of. He hasn't got any planets in his first house, but also, Aquarius and Sagittarius are similar in a few ways, but I think overall he can identify with just being sort of friendly and sociable, talkative, maybe even a little bit restless. There's a trait that both of those sort of archetypes share. Because the first house is actually ruled by Aries, which is about sort of self-discovery and that pioneering sort of attitude and going out and discovering things in the world, it is also what we're discovering about our own personalities. So he will be learning more and more about his quirkiness and his Uranian influence, as well as his North Node, because the North Node is sort of the sign we're growing into as we mature. So, and they're both an air sign, so it's all about sort of communication, as well as non-verbal communication, thoughts, insights, cerebral qualities, and intellect. So because Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, I'll just talk a bit about what that sort of planet represents and the archetype. It rules sort of separation, upheaval, unexpected things that happen or circumstances and events that happen, change, inventions, revolutions, social situations, and also sort of groups and organisations, sudden realisations, and also the incoming age, anything that's new and relevant, mental pioneers, as well as Saturn representing responsibility and Uranus representing freedom, which both rule Aquarius. Without the discipline of Saturn, there can be no real freedom. Another thing that sort of Aquarius needs to learn is the opposite sign of Leo, because Aquarius can kind of come across as maybe a bit aloof and cold and distant because they are so intellectual and mind orientated, that Leo's all about the heart and the warmth of heart. So that's also what they're learning as well, and learning to balance themselves out that way. So I'm just going to go to the third house now. He's actually got a moon in Taurus, and that's exalted in the sign. So it's a very strong, very good moon. The moon's all to do with your emotions, your sort of instinctive nature, and what you sort of need to feel safe and secure, as well as your nurturing as well growing up. It's also sort of how and where we seek comfort. So how would be the sign and where would be the house placement. So for Taurus, anything from sort of good quality food, good quality clothes and possessions, to a loyal and stable relationship. Taurus especially is about security, ruling the house of sort of income and possession. So for them, all forms of security is very important, from material security to physical, emotional security. If you kind of compare them to like a Sagittarius moon, which like to sort of live in the moment, you know, couch surfing, traveling, they're not too worried about having a stable home. They like to sort of, they're more about the freedom and the adventure of things. So your moon sign is how you also act when you're kind of upset or emotional. They can have a tendency to sort of overindulge in things like shopping, and overeating is also quite common. Because Taurus rules any sort of the sensual pleasures in life, taste, textures, the luxuries, having nice things, is very hedonistic. With Taurus, they're very actually slow to anger as well and to get emotional. I think it would take a lot for us to see him visibly angry as well, because the Mars sign is also in a non-confrontational sign, and with the moon in Taurus it just takes a while to build that anger. If you kind of compare it to sort of an impulsive Aries, which just lets its anger out as soon as it feels it, a Taurus will sort of hold on to it, can be a bit resentful in that way, and then but when it does unleash its anger, it's quite intense. And the ball is kind of fearless. It has this sort of all-encompassing rage, you know, that can explode because it's been pent up for so long. They're also kind of known to hold grudges, quite similar to the opposite sign of Scorpio as well, which it also has a lot of influence of. So Taurus also rules money, so lacking it will kind of result in the feeling of extreme vulnerability. That's how we are when the moon is sort of exposed, where we're vulnerable. It's also got a quincunx, which is a sort of a difficult aspect. It just indicates the degrees and the angles between each of the planets and how they interact with each other. So it has this quincunx to Venus, which is ruling Taurus and rules money also. So I think that would be quite possible. Taurus also likes routine, so routines can help his sort of emotional nature and to feel most comfortable when he finds something he likes and sticks to it. This moon can also be a little bit of a hermit as well, likewise with a maybe Cancer moon as well, prefers sort of the comfort of his own home. He's also got moon in opposition to Saturn, and Saturn's all about sort of a lack or restrictions in our life. It can present also obstacles growing up. So with the moon, which is all about sort of nurture and comfort in a sort of push and pull, which is that energy of the opposition, it can be sort of quite a challenging aspect for him to feel comfortable and unsettling almost. But in saying that, Saturn's also sort of delayed gratification as well, and things sort of getting better with time. So I would say as he gets older, he'd sort of be able to deal with this energy a lot better and learn how to sort of nurture himself rather than seeking it externally, or at the very least be able to live with this placement. Saturn there can also sort of represent a strict upbringing as well, as it rules sort of boundaries and limitations, and the moon being how we were brought up and our family ties as well. I think he was also in the military when he was younger as well, so this would help a lot with this Saturn sort of controlling his emotions and helping him keep in line and having that sort of real discipline. There's also a quincunx going to Uranus from the moon, which makes it very sort of excitable and spontaneous also as well. I think it could also mean that he has a bit of a hard time having the balance of freedom and sort of stability and continuity, which is Taurus. So with the moon being at the bottom of the chart as well, close to the IC there, which is the bottom of the chart, I was saying it represents midnight, the sort of most internal part of ourselves, our sort of deep psychological nature. We often don't show this to other people. People don't realise this side of ourselves because it's usually how we are when we're alone. But with his moon there in the third house of communication, he would have a strong need to communicate and sort of will be happiest when he is communicating his feelings in a very sort of precise, practical, earthy, Taurus sort of way. I would also say the moon being our instincts in a house that's to do with our intellect, that he could be quite intuitive. This house also rules siblings as well, the third house, so a feminine planet being there, it could mean that and just one planet could mean that he just has a sister, and the moon being also a benefic planet, maybe quite a loving, generous person. Though I'm not too sure about their relationship actually, because there is a quincunx going to the Venus, and Venus is all about your relationships as well, and how you relate to people. And the quincunx energy is kind of a frustrating energy. It's like a stone in the shoe where it's just a bit uncomfortable, and as well as the opposition to Saturn, which is a very strict and stern sort of planet. He might maybe get annoyed with her and then feel he needs to tell her off, or he can even do this with himself and, you know, monitoring and making sure he sort of express or conveys his emotions, which is all about the third house and the moon, in an appropriate sort of way. That's very much Saturn. It's quite a good trait really, being in the public eye. You kind of do need to do that to a degree, I think. So the moon is also the apex of a yod with Uranus and Venus, which means that there is some attention needed. So his sort of uniqueness and intellectual abilities, which would be Uranus, also what he does for work, acting in the 10th house, is sextiling, so in a harmonious aspect to Venus, which is your talents and also what makes you money, and being in the sign Libra as well, it's to do with the arts, so it all fits in with his career being an actor. Both of them making a yod and the quincunx to the moon might not be feeling him fully emotionally, or he might have a trouble sort of feeling comfortable at home and at work to a certain degree, or just finding that sort of complete happiness in either realm of his life. It could also mean his career, Uranus being in the 10th house, and relationships, Venus, again, he needs to be sort of more flexible in this realm, because Uranus is in Sagittarius and Venus being in Libra. They're both mutable signs. They need to be sort of flexible in a way. But then the Taurus moon being in a fixed sign, it can be quite stubborn and maybe doesn't like that so much, and maybe even find it irritating. The quincunx is not as bad as a square aspect, but like I say, it is still an uncomfortable sort of energy. But the emotional side of him, I don't think he would be, you know, that happy with the sort of change and unpredictability of his career in a way. Any sort of hard aspect that goes to your moon, it can mean that you sort of have a hard time relaxing fully. With the yod as well, he may feel like he's sort of being dragged along in life, or haven't had enough time to sort of get used to things before it happens, as the moon moves faster than the other two planets that it's connected with here. With the yod, you kind of need to express and also embrace each planet and the individual signs that they're in separately. And especially the apex of the yod, it's usually pointing to something that needs attention and needs to be expressed in a healthy way. So he's actually also got Chiron in the 4th house, Chiron the wounded healer, but I'm not going to go too much into Chiron because I feel like it's maybe a bit too deep and personal for this type of video, so I'm just going to give a general overview of his type of personality, not so much the depths. It's usually something to do with something uncomfortable or painful in his upbringing or home life. Chiron in Gemini as well, it can also sort of mean a fear or doubt of sort of intellectual abilities and communication with people. Maybe he's too much in the mental sphere of life. Especially with the Sagittarius stellium, he needs to sort of ground more and use that, again, the focus on the earthy moon. But whatever it is, whatever his wound is quincunxing Pluto exact to the degree. So it's very transformative, whatever he needs to, that wound he needs to deal with in his life. And usually Chiron, we have our first Chiron return about 50, 55. So when we have our midlife crisis, it's when we deal with all our past hurts and wounds, and we learn to sort of evolve consciously in that way. Especially with Pluto, he might even have to have sort of like a metaphorical death of some sort. Pluto ruling death, sex, rebirth, transformation. And Chiron making a nice aspect, a trine to the ascendant, so I think it would give him sort of a sensitive and understanding quality to how he presents himself. So his North Node is in Gemini, and the North Node is our destiny. It's usually the sign and a house, an area of our life that we're heading towards and we need to learn about and grow into to evolve. So in Gemini, it's sort of a quest for him to see life from other people's point of view a bit more, and also to become adept in the art of communication, asking questions, seeing life from different people's perspectives as well. With Gemini, it can be a bit gossipy, a bit scattered, a bit too erratic. So he needs to develop sort of focus and communicate his ideas in a way that sort of helps the people in his life, usually his family being in the 4th house there. Also in the 4th house, it's sort of learning about his roots, his home life, his upbringing, his emotions again. And it being in a very private house and the South Node being in a very public house, he might need to overcome sort of this idea of being out in the public sphere and being recognised, learning about how to retreat sort of inwards and understand himself more. I think he'd be quite a social butterfly as well. His 5th house of fun and sort of creativity is ruled by Gemini, and Gemini being up in the 10th house, so it's a very sociable. It could also mean work is kind of fun for him and enjoyable as well. So I'm just going to go straight to the descendant now. So it's ruling the 7th house of relationships and marriage. It's in Leo, which is a fixed fire sign. The descendant can sometimes be the qualities we don't really tend to like in other people, because we present ourselves as the opposite sign. So for him, Aquarius, he values those, he identifies with those qualities, but Leo, he doesn't like people that are too sort of loud, obnoxious or egotistical and needs to be the centre of attention all the time. What we need to do is sort of learn that we can be the traits of the sign that rule the 7th house cusp in our relationships. So I think with Leo there, he could sort of need that affection, attention and praise in a relationship. Also with Venus being in Libra as well, Libra love the sort of praise and attention as well. So with the Aquarius rising, he may come across as sort of aloof and a bit cold and distant maybe, but when he's actually in a relationship with someone, the Leo comes out and he's a bit more affectionate and warm and also generous and would like someone who is also these qualities as well. So now I'm just going to move on to Mars in the 8th house, and the Mars is where we put our energy, our assertion, our aggression, our actions, how we go about things. So in Libra, he tends to sort of be the mediator or the negotiator in a conflict. Typically he doesn't like conflict or any sort of heated discussions, but being in the 8th house, I think he could settle for having sort of a passionate, deep discussion about some interesting topic. Mars is also how we act when we sort of feel threatened as well. So when confronted, he most likely would use his words and reason to dissolve any sort of issues, because Libra being an air sign, they usually use their words and their wit. His first reaction might even be to be quite fair and almost sort of polite about it. Both his Mars and Venus are in Libra are in a very sort of non-confrontational sign, so he appears very sort of open and accepting, but if he does have an issue, I think he would sort of talk about it later, not directly. So Mars also being in the 8th, he sort of puts his energy into working with other people, 8th house being what we share and joint enterprises and share with other people, pulling his ideas and sort of resources to create something. But in Libra, it's not the most irrational sign actually. I think he could have sort of time to think about things before he does them. Though there is a square to the Neptune, which kind of rules drugs and alcohol, and sort of escapism as well. So that energy is a bit reckless and impulsive, so he might need to be careful of that. So Venus in Libra is in his home sign, but is in full in the 8th house. It's sort of what we tend to like in other people and what we like in a partner. So Venus and Libra being very beautiful, charming, sociable, fair, cooperative, an equal partner, someone who is like a companion and a friend, as well as having sort of depth of character and even maybe being a bit mysterious, because that Scorpio influence with the 8th house there. This is also how he acts in relationships, the Venus sign, and how he relates to people. So very considerate and kind and likes to have good communication, but also very compassionate and affectionate, being in the 8th house again. Venus and Mars being in the 8th house can sometimes have this Scorpio influence, kind of similarly to a Scorpio Mars or a Scorpio Venus, almost this palpable sexual energy that attracts people to them. And this Venus, how he relates to people in his relationships and friendships, is trining the North Node. So where he's heading to, how he's evolving, I think deep, profound, sort of meaningful relationships will help him get there. Venus is also sextiling Uranus, so sextiles, again, a good opportunity and good aspect. So I think he would require a healthy amount of freedom and independence in relationships. And then we go to Pluto in the 9th house in Scorpio. These outer planets, I'm just going to interpret them via house, not the sign, as a generational planets and move quite slowly. So wherever Pluto touches, there's usually great transformation and profound sort of learning to be done, and sort of discoveries for him involving other cultures, sort of higher education, faith, and how the universe works, being the 9th house. Pluto is all about desire, and here in the ninth house it'd be desire for knowledge and also for a higher sort of perspective. Uncovering these sort of things when he does might be a bit uncomfortable though. There is a quincunx going to the Chiron that past her. It may have something to do with travelling or being away from home. Ultimately, I think it's a positive thing having a lot of Pluto influence in your chart. You know, it helps you learn, it helps you grow. Pluto doesn't let things be stale for too long. It really helps you transform, sometimes in a harsh way, but ultimately it's for the betterment. It's like the metaphor of the phoenix rising from the ashes. Ultimately, you transform into something more evolved and renewed and experienced. Then we've got Saturn in Scorpio as well there with Pluto, so he's very sort of determined, powerful and resourceful, I think, at work. Maybe even restrictions, sort of searching for the meaning in life, which is the ninth house. He may sort of doubt and be quite critical of a lot of things in life. Oppression almost in life, and feeling sort of the structural, social, economic sort of system. There's no sort of faith there or optimism. I think he actually even described this in a TED talk he did recently as well. Ultimately with Saturn it takes time though to reap the benefits of our struggles, so I think with hard work and becoming more powerful, which is Scorpio, he can sort of overcome this. Ninth house can also be our worldview. You know, I think he would want a very practical, realistic sort of understanding of the world and has to experience something to kind of believe in it. Then we go to his sun sign in Scorpio. Most people sort of usually know the sun sign. That's the thing they do know about astrology. So it's just one aspect of our chart. The sun represents sort of our inner personality, our ego. It's also the house placement it is in is usually where we shine in our life. He's typically a sort of more private, secretive person. A sort of dramatic, deep, dark, sort of sinister, all the Pluto things in life don't sort of shock him, as the depths of Pluto are intense itself. It represents Hades, the underworld, the sort of dark reality that lives beyond the surface of all things. It also represents sort of metamorphosis. It's succeedent to the 7th house of relationships. And it was the 8th house of how we are when we're in a relationship, what we share, you know, sex, money, and how we are when we're sort of merged with something else. It's also destruction, corruption, unconscious desires, the occult, and anything sort of mysterious or hidden. Pluto is also sort of about surrendering the light to go into the depths and going somewhere where it will reveal the truth, because Scorpio is all about uncovering and discovering the truth, and also where you become authentic, because Scorpio also really doesn't like superficiality. Scorpio suns can also be very strong, passionate, suspicious, good at reading people and their motives. They have this magnetism as well. They can be very focused, ambitious and driven, and have control. Extremely loving and protective though. It being a water sign, they're very reflective and emotional as well. The sun really wants to shine and it wants to be noticed. Conjunct the midheaven, which is our public image. It's like our Facebook profile, how people know us. Also our career and our vocation and what we want to achieve. Scorpio, it wears the helmet of invisibility. It doesn't want to be seen or noticed. So there's two very conflicting energies here for him, which would be quite uncomfortable, I would imagine. It might feel like he wants to shine and he wants to be noticed, and then the Scorpio sort of influence there. When he does get these interviews and this attention, he sort of hides, or he looks like he doesn't really want it, or he looks sort of maybe uninterested, but he's not. Scorpio would more likely want to be behind the scenes than being the big star, I would imagine. But the sun would rather be the star. So like I say, conflicting energy. We all have contradictions within ourselves, you know, we say one thing, we feel another. So there's a lot going on in our personalities, so many layers. So this is a very interesting one. And that Aquarius rising can also come across as uninterested as well, supporting that about the Scorpio, but ultimately he's not. He's very enthusiastic. He's got a Sagittarius stellium, in which is usually 4 or more planets within the same sign, usually conjunct, which means they're right next to each other. It means this is a very sort of dominant part of his personality, the Sagittarian archetype, in the realm of his career and work and public image, which is the 10th house, seen as very benevolent and lively, friendly and optimistic, also driven and has high ideals. Being a fire sign, he would have a lot of energy as well, and also very meaning orientated. And I would imagine he would sort of want jobs that have sort of a deeper meaning and purpose other than just sort of entertainment. Sagittarius also ruling his 11th house cusp, so how he is with his associates at work usually, and groups of people, friends. So people who know him will probably know him more as a Sagittarius type, or that sort of Scorpio Libran energy. There's a bit of a mixture. 11th house also kind of rules like-minded people, so I would assume he'd sort of want to associate with people that are more Sagittarius types, that are a bit more positive and have sort of big ideas and big dreams of what they want to do. So we'll start with Mercury. Mercury it rules the 3rd house of how we communicate. It rules our intellect, our communication style, everything from our tonality of our voice to how we think and how we speak, and also how we perceive situations as well. So in Sagittarius, his communication style is very sort of enthusiastic, and he can talk about sort of philosophy, learning, traveling, other cultures. I don't think he would mind talking about his work because it's in the 10th house of career. These people can kind of also have a very sort of jolly and infectious laugh. With the Sag stellium and Venus and Mars in Libra, I would say he's very agreeable and also adaptable. Sagittarius can sometimes sort of blurt things out and reveal too much about themselves. It's conjunct Uranus as well, so which is very unpredictable and eccentric. But with the Scorpio influence there, I think he could be less so. Or if he does, that he might sort of secretly scold himself afterwards, because Scorpio doesn't like to reveal much. But what both sort of Sagittarius and Scorpio care about is the truth. The only opposing sort of energy to this would be the Mars and Venus being in Libra. Libra can kind of say things just to please people, so he may have to learn about this and sort of develop his candour and frankness. So Uranus being in the 10th house, he uses his wit, his intellect, his humour in his career. He appears clever, well-read and well-spoken at work. So Uranus being in the 10th house stir things up a little bit more. So he wants to be independent, self-employed, do something sort of unconventional, and also something that provides plenty of mental stimulation as well, and not do jobs that he finds sort of boring or stagnant. So being an actor is sort of perfect for him. I think he would want to contribute something original to society as well through his work. Could also mean he sort of got sudden public recognition being in the 10th house from being these Uranian sort of qualities, sort of quirky and different and unusual. Jupiter now being in the 10th house in Sagittarius, it's in its home sign. It's usually where we want to find meaning, and I think he would want to have meaning in his career. I could see him sort of travelling overseas quite a lot for work, or being on a foreign film, or a film about different cultures and different countries. He could eventually may want to teach people. Jupiter is the teacher, or at the least would like to sort of share his knowledge with people about his career and sort of motivate and inspire people. When you have a stellium, it's a lot of focus is on this archetype, and you kind of need to be aware of it to be able to balance it out a little bit as well. There's 12 zodiacal archetypes, so if we just have a lot of focus on one, we need to at least balance it out with the opposite of that to be a bit more of an all-round personality. So the opposite sign to Sagittarius is Gemini, and the North Node being in Gemini as well, it's sort of pointing that towards being those qualities as well as becoming that in his later years. He relies on these sort of planets and associations to succeed and sort of feel fulfilled in life. But what he really needs to do is put that attention into the Gemini traits, and also in the 4th house of sort of family, his past, parents, his deep psychological nature, privacy, and also intimate matters, and also more energy in developing the sort of more higher Gemini traits, which are good communication, knowledge, speaking. He did do a TED talk, like I was saying before, recently, so that will really help his sort of public speaking, processing and exchanging information, as well as sort of making connections. So Neptune's in the 11th house in Sagittarius. Neptune's the planet at the end of the zodiacal wheel, at the 12th house. It sort of represents a death, or dissolving back into the collective, back into oneness, where there's no sort of boundaries or limitations or anything. And then we rebirth into the 1st house, which is ruled by Aries, which is the baby. So with the planet of no boundaries or separation in the sign of expansion and boundlessness, he may not realise sort of how big and how Sagittarius he can be sometimes in the area of friends and associations and groups. So this could be at the highest expression, overly optimistic, encouraging, generous, and very jovial. It's sextiling the ascendant as well, so it could help him appear sort of more compassionate than the typical Aquarius. At the very lower expression though, with Neptune, it could be overly careless, irresponsible, opinionated and blunt. But square Mars, he could even be sort of irrepressible. He may also have to learn to set boundaries with friends as well, as Neptune has none and can also sort of be the victim and very sacrificial and give to others when even if he had nothing to give. The other thing with Neptune is it can kind of fall into needing to be needed, very helpful and giving as well, and end up sort of putting themselves into situations where this happens. Neptune can also make this particular area of our life quite foggy and hard to sort of get a grasp on, and hard to also interpret, so he may find that area of his life sort of hard to understand himself. Neptune also representing film, it could just mean that he mingles with these sort of people, which would be very evident. But to use the higher expression of Neptune and spending his time with people being creative and artistic. So then we go to the other asteroid, Ceres, which is all about nurture really. It represents Demeter, if you know the Greek mythology for that. I won't go into that now, but it's usually how we like to be nurtured and how we nurture other people. So in the sign of Aquarius, in the 12th house, he usually likes to nurture and be nurtured in a way that respects his individuality and his freedom. It's also a lot about learning about compassion. Pisces rule in 12th house. Neptune's actually in the 11th house, which is ruled by Aquarius, so there's a bit of a connection there as well. So how to also give this nurturing to a large group of people as well, being the 11th house. It's also, the 11th house is fans, which is more than likely going to be through his work. So I hope you enjoyed the video, leave a like or comment, and I'll see you soon.